a tank, 37 millimeter and a tank gun for 18 weeks. And then we went to ASTP and then on to Fort Benning, where we had the same basic training again, but we got to ride in trucks. By that time, everybody had, their muscles had muscle. I mean, we were strong, virulent, ready to go. So we still didn't know whether we were going to Japan or to Europe. So so in the meantime, my friend and I had bought a Packard, 1939 Packard sedan, but we named it Bonsai for charge, and we charged around. We'd go up to Atlanta and everything, and have a big weekend. But when it was time to ship out, it was not until we got to Camp Kilmer that we realized we were going to be on the Queen Mary going to Europe, which went by itself without escort. We ended up in Glasgow, and then into England, and stayed there about a month till we could get a ship to take us over to Le Havre from Liverpool. And I think we spent 5 days in the Channel, just going around in circles, and everybody was seasick and down underneath. But I stayed up on deck as much as I could. At any rate, we caught a train, 70 and 40 men, 40 or 6, 40 and 8, either 8 horses or 40 men, and then on trucks down to the Saar Valley, and joined the Third Army with General Patton. And our first engagement was can you imagine now? Our first assault was up a slope. It was flat as a flitter, but it was about 45 degrees, going up to the top of a hill, and we were replacing the 106th Division. 26th Division, thank you. And bodies of these soldiers were littered all over the slope. And this is really challenging when it's your first assault up to take this hill. At any rate, we started out and of course received a mortar fire that had wiped out part of their division. And when we got to the top, I checked with the sergeant who was bringing up the rear. I said, you know, if I falter or get hit, well, you just take over, come on up front and lead them up. At any rate, we only had a few casualties somehow, and possibly our artillery had driven out the machine guns, which is, killed these 26 guys who were lying there. And I told everybody, don't mess with those bodies, because Germans were reputed to booby trap bodies which were deceased, and then we would get killed too, or injured. So we made it to the top, and it was a strange thing that I said, well, God, you got me up here to the top of this hill, and thank you a lot, but now I'll take over. Now, I don't know why I ever said that in a prayer, but that's what I said. And so the next engagement was down to the right of that, at a place called Obergilbach. But this time we had a rolling barrage. A rolling barrage is a textbook perfect way to take an objective. and it's the way the cannon shells, you can see them explode in a line across, and then they go up. It's creeping up to the top of the hill. Well, by the time it got to the top of the hill, everything should have been wiped out, including the tripwires and everything else. So that was pretty easy to do. But before that, it seemed like tanks were coming from the right, and the sergeant said, "Hit the ground," and tanks were coming. But it was a plane. It was a P-47. P-47 dropped a bomb up there, and that, of course, didn't do much in the way of casualty, but morale-wise, it was great for us and bad for them. And after we took that hill, it was nighttime, and so it happened to be that I was in this bomb crater with about 8 guys, and the machine gun, a German machine gun, was lobbing tracers, thank you, in the air, going like this. And I said, "A couple of you guys, come on, we're going to go knock out that machine gun," because it was pretty close. And so I raised my head up to get up and go do that, when I could hear these coming right along. It was hitting the grass. It was so low. And I heard this, and I just slid back down into this bomb crater. And it was a good thing that this happened that way, because a lot of people got hit by doing the same thing I did. This was a sucker deal. These tracers, lazy tracers, going up in the air like that. And then the sweeping non-tracer covering the ground like that and hitting everybody in the legs. I had my roommate got hit in the legs and was casualty, and my best friend from Charlotte was hit in the hip. Both of them got it. He was in F Company. So in a little bit, it seemed like the next day, half my platoon was gone after another attack on the village, and I couldn't figure out where they went. And I found out later they had gone to F Company, which had been decimated by tank fire. And they just came and grabbed up who it was, I guess, some general. Grabbed up half of my whole platoon, including my first sergeant, Sergeant Gibbon.
Bob, let me interject right there. It's good. F Company include Fred Carmichael. You attended many of our unions, and what happened when the segment was broken down into the 2nd Battalion went basically up sort of the middle. This was a division line between the regiments. The 346 was over here, and 347th was over here, going up to over Gilbach. Well, the 2nd Battalion was attacking up this way, and the 3rd Battalion was kind of along the left here. So I don't know whether there was more open ground in this area that they were, but F Company, I think G Company also took lots of casualties, and they had to fill it up with people from the 3rd Battalion, and that's what happened to some of your men, wasn't it?
Yeah, evidently, but the thing about it was they didn't tell me anything about it.
Yeah.
I mean,
I know it.
I was really dumbfounded.
Yeah.
It was later on that one of the men from my platoon called me. It was 50 years after the war was over. He called me and said, "Do you remember so-and-so and so-and-so?" And I said, yeah, like as if I did. But then he said, "Do you remember Sergeant Gibbon?" And I said, "Well, sure, he was the platoon sergeant. He'd been with the platoon for years before I joined it, for a month before we shipped out. And he said, well, do you know he threatened to shoot you? And I said, who, little old me, innocent me? I'm so smart, I always do everything just right. And that's what started me writing down little things about how great I was. And it ended up in the book. Otherwise, I never would have read it, but it was a complete catharsis to go over this. I think all these days and nights, for 50 years, I had repressed it or tried to forget it. Well, I mean, stuff like this, you just don't forget. And in fact, Marley's, my wife, and the two kids, were headed for Florida it was before interstate highways, and we stopped in Georgia for the night, and I was asleep, dead asleep at midnight or whatever, when down this hill. We were at the bottom of the hill, and it turned out to be just a truck backfiring, but I was under the bed, just like that. And
Bob, you promised now that I could interrupt you. We got to move on. We got a lot to cover. So let's talk about the time where you had to go back and get the I Company men, because that's a significant on what happened in the future.
Okay, that was the next.
Yeah.
That was the next objective anyway, because we were on the defensive here all of a sudden at Gershheim, and
Right up in here.
and that's just the worst place to be. And I don't know why this ever happened, but we ended up in the woods with artillery coming at us. And the worst thing about being in the woods with a foxhole is that the shell explodes before it hits the ground. It hits the tree, and then it's like a shotgun. All this shrapnel is spread out. In fact, one of them severed a log and popped and hit me on the knee. I thought I was hit by the shell, but I wasn't. But it was God's providence that when this wire was severed, I told my runner, I said, go back and splice those together so I can get some artillery, counter battery. And which he did. He went back, and here I had a good line, and this calm voice said, "This is Cannon Company." And I said, "That's what I want, I want field artillery." And I told him what was going on, and he said, "Well, give me the coordinates, and I'll put out a shell there, and we'll make it phosphorus so you can see that it's our shell." So he lobbed one right where I told him, in between me, and it looked like a reinforced platoon was crossing the woods, getting ready to attack. And so just about that time, the word came down, everybody off this hill, and they didn't say why. So we were glad enough to get up and leave those foxholes. And down there were trucks at the CP and at the bottom of the hill in this little town of Gershheim. And I put all my men in my platoon on the truck. And this major came up. I didn't know who he was. And he said, 2 men from my company have been left up on the hill. And you go get them. And I said, "Well, sir, I'm from K Company, and my men are on the truck." So he said, "And take that sergeant with you." I mean, he didn't even pay attention to my problem or the situation, or call up I Company or get somebody from their own company to go get them. No, he just picked the first lieutenant he saw to go do that. So I started up that hill and finally got them out. And by the time we got back, it was about 2 miles. And when I got back, all the trucks were gone. Here I was with 2 other guys, 2 buck privates, on foot. And so we hitchhiked, finally caught a ride, and we were headed up to the boat. And when we got there, oh, you've been killed in action.
Let me stop you right here a minute. Let me summarize right quick what has happened right here, okay, before he tells about this. The division had pushed up as far north as Gersham and over here to Mendelsheim. One regiment was here. The bulge had occurred and the division was withdrawn. So what was happening in this process, even though they were this far and it started out down about here, they withdrew back to this position, and the 35th and the 44th took over in a defensive position down here. They gave up all this land that this 87th had already secured, but they had to in order to pull them out. They took up a defensive position. And then everybody was brought out by trucks way back, evacuated to the south, and moved back around to Reims. So it's in that process of that moving out that he was told to go back to get these other men from his other company. And so he didn't stay with K Company when they were evacuated. And he didn't catch up with them until he's going to tell us next about his becoming a part of the Tiger Patrol.
Do you know what the date of that?
We can talk later.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Thank you.
So I reported to the colonel, and the colonel says, "Oh, well, you've been you're listed as KIA, so of course we've got a replacement for you." And then he said, "But I do have this opportunity for a volunteer to be leader of a patrol of 7 men and a sergeant. Everybody has to volunteer to be in this unit." And so I was sitting on the sofa there, little fire going in the fireplace, and it was warm for the first time, dry. And he said, "And you'll be station. You can spend the days here, and then usually go out at night on your patrols." And so I said, "Boy, since I've been a private, everybody says, do not volunteer, do not volunteer." And so I was saying that to myself, do not volunteer, when my mouth said, I'll take it. Now that I couldn't believe I did what I did. And then he said, "And oh, by the way, it's called the Tiger Patrol." And that was the most ferocious tank the Germans had. And we were really, scared of them because they were impenetrable. You couldn't hit them. If you shot a bazooka at a Tiger Patrol, a Tiger tank, if you were lucky and got in between the crack between the turret and the hull, it might tilt the turret a little bit. Or if you hit a track, it might knock off the track. And they were always easily repaired. Only a bomb from a plane or artillery fire could knock out a Tiger tank. So when you hear about bazookas knocking out Tiger tanks, don't even believe it at all. This may be for a second or two.
Bob, we got to move on now to this incident as the Tiger Patrol leader. We got a lot to cover. Tell us about what happened at this place in Luxembourg up here.
Which one?
The Stein down in Luxembourg when you were in the barn and that incident up there. Remember that one?
Yeah, but so much happened.
I know they did, but we're already 30 minutes, so we got to get all this stuff in. I want them to know about your wife too.
Great.
30 minutes was shorter than we thought, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, skipping all the bloody crossroads and everything else.
Yeah.
down, then we moved out from Bonnaroo, Belgium. We got in trucks after the skies cleared and Bastogne was retaken. We moved to Ectornot, above Ectornot.
In Luxembourg.
And I was told to go capture a prisoner. So we made several efforts to go down to this outpost at a little, it wasn't even hardly a village, but it had a railroad and a station. And we headed out one night. Gil, my associate, he said I always walked crab-legged down SWAT with my hands out in front, reaching for tripwires. And I don't even recall that, but he said I always did, leading that patrol down there. So all 7 of us went on down this embankment to the Owl River. Above the Owl River is the Siegfried Line, with all the big guns and whatever defensive, and the Dragon's Teeth anti-tank barricades. So we were supposed to get a prisoner, and this other guy, it wasn't Gil this time, he was a Jewish boy, and he said, I can speak a little Yiddish German to them, and I'm going to offer them a carton of cigarettes if they'll give up. So I said, okay. I mean, you just play things by ear like this. You know. So he went up to the 2 guards that was standing there, and I went across this railroad track to cover him. So they conversed for a second or two, or a minute or two, not a minute, maybe 15 seconds, when all of a sudden this one German pulled a pin on a grenade, and Gil opened with his .45 grease gun, which was a substitute for a Tommy gun that the U.S. Army issued, and it has nothing but recoil, and the bullets go around like this. When you fire it, you try to hold it down if you keep on firing. And that's what happened. The bullets, I don't even think they touched the guards, and they were 5 feet from them. And they took off, and I threw a grenade at them as they left. So then he ran up to the rest of the patrol, which was lying in a ditch next to the railroad tracks. And I ended up in the train station, which wasn't even half as big as this, with a low ceiling and all, but the benches all around it. When all of a sudden, burp gun tracer bullets came in to the window, which was not there, I mean just open with glass. And the bullets went around and around the whole station, lighting it up like a Christmas tree. And I was under the bench, and when that quit, I figured he was putting in a new magazine. So I zipped out in this dark, nobody could see anything. And he didn't see me leave, and he kept shooting in there. So while he was shooting in there, I turned around and stopped and threw a grenade at him. And then people started passing up their grenades, when all of a sudden a machine gun opened up from an upper window or something from a house next to the railroad station, and these tracer bullets were landing in front of me about 15 feet, and their guns don't buckle or spray around. If it had been our machine gun, I'd been hit because of the jumping around the firing does. It makes a pattern. At any rate, these bullets made a little spot in the snow, so these guys passed up grenades, and I stood there and kept throwing, and he kept shooting at that spark, which is out 15 feet, and I pulled one in. It's about training. we should have more training instead of when on the Queen Mary about ladies' aid and whatever in Britain, we ought to learn the German language, like Kommen Sie raus and Hande Hope, things like that, just simple things. But we didn't. And so finally we ran out of grenades and everything, and the things calmed down. We started leaving when the entire Siegfried line opened up from the ridge up above the Our River, and suddenly a flare popped, so that the training that we had was utilized right there at that spot. I yelled, freeze! And everybody has to stop, no matter what position you're in, and hold it till the flare goes out. Because otherwise, they're looking for a movement, and that's what they're going to concentrate on. So I yelled, freeze! And nothing happened as far as aiming at us with their machine guns or mortars. And when the flare went out, we escaped on up the hill. All 7 of us got away with no damages.
Okay, Bob, I've got to rock in a minute. Let me tell you, I want you to, there are several other incidents he writes about that occurred in this section. Now, this is in Luxembourg. This is the country of Luxembourg across the river up in here. And the division was back up in this direction here. His patrol had come down basically this way and into this little town. And it was called Steinheim. Isn't that the name of the little village here? Steinheim? Steinheim, okay. And see this railroad track here? This is not the best picture, but this is what Steinheim looks like today, or somewhat. It's this a much larger village. This is the river running through here. And tell us about the trip you made back there with your son, Bob. You didn't find the railroad track, did you?
Oh no, they pulled up the tracks, and there was a bicycle lane into Ectodon. Yeah, we visited that area and talked with people there, and they were very nice. And suddenly we picked up a guy who was a German girl. I mean, it was unbelievable. She says there's going to be a celebration in town, and they're going to have a ceremony at the town square and laying a wreath for the Air Force. And so I joined them, and there was George and Nathan were along. They served us lunch down in Hector Dock, and then took us to a museum down in nearby town.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he's served in that Tiger Patrol for considerable time, but the most exciting thing he did, I think, was when they moved him to the Recon. Now, this is the M6 Recon vehicle that he was involved with. So tell us some of your experiences when you were serving as the lieutenant with Recon, Bob.
Yeah, this is really strange, because I had been transferred from the Tiger Patrol. They cut out all this stuff at the end of the bullet, and but they had the Recon company had been shot up with a lot of casualties, and they needed an extra officer, because they only had first lieutenant, and he was the company commander then. And they picked me because I had been experienced in Recon all that whole month. And so when I left the L company, everybody said, "Who does he know?" Because all they do at the Recon is guard the general. So he must know somebody higher up. But when I got there, it was a different story. I was going to be leading the entire task force of 4 or 5 light tanks, 4 or 5 medium Shermans, and tank destroyers, and then truckloads of infantry, because I was so experienced in this. So, the doughboys were in the trenches along the side of Dragon's Teeth. He said, "How about a ride?" And I said, "Well, come on, cowboy, hop on." And about 6 of them jumped on the back of my armored car, and we took off. And so I had the driver stop at every bridge and every ridge and got out. I mean, I didn't get out, but to just search for wires under the bridges, I had to jump off and get down, go search for wires. And this made the colonel mad that was running the task force knew that we wore no insignia, so I called him colonel all the time, and he didn't object, though he was just a captain. and so this happened. This went on. We went down to the Moselle River. We were headed down to the Moselle Valley. Our objective was Koblenz, but on the way we crossed a river, and there was an order to make a bridgehead across the some river at this village, and Lissendorf, I think. Anyway, the colonel said, "Get up earlier and get going." So I pulled out, and I was going down this slope, and here in front of me in the snow, you could see Tiger tank tracks. You know, they're this wide. Ours are this wide, time and a half wider, and these tracks came out right in front of us. So I said, "Oh boy, this is going to be nice. All he has to do is swing his gun around and give us one pop, and we're history." But we kept creeping along there, and finally these tank tracks went off to the left in another direction. So as we moved along, we expected them to have outposts before this village, but we encountered no outposts. And here we were, right in the village, practically. And this bundle on the left, it was early in the morning. Here was this general or colonel or whatever having coffee in the bay window. You could just see him. The sun was streaming right in his face, and his coffee cup was halfway to his mouth, and his face was utter amazement seeing this star in front of this vehicle coming right at him. And I yelled into the microphone to Colonel Muir, said, "Have a Jeep pick up those officers in this first house on the left." And we swung around and headed down into the village. And the civilians were lined up across the street, reading their newspapers in long fur overcoats, waiting on rations, blocking our way. And I said, "Sergeant, don't fire your gun." But he went, "Brr," and they dispersed, they evaporated. I mean, this was amazing to everybody. And here I said, "Step on it." And so the driver hustled down, and we got down about 100 yards from the bridge, and it blew up. Stones were like basketballs coming up. And I dived under with the machine gunner, and he dived under with the driver as the driver slammed on the brakes, and the old boys, I don't know what happened to them. They jumped off as soon as they could. And here these stones were landing on top of our vehicle. And so then we messed around there a little bit. The engineers had to come in that day with their Bailey Bridge, it was called, a tinker toy thing they put up. These huge steel things, and then the next morning, it took all night. We spent the night inside in some empty house, sleeping, and the mortar shells would come in, hit those tile roofs, but they never penetrated that tile. So the next day, Colonel said, "All right, get out and get across that bridge. See if it's safe for our tanks to go across." So that's what happened. We went on to the next objective, and following objective was Koblenz after crossing they had the bridge they built across the yes, Catherine,
We're gonna let you have some water.
sit down. She's my mother as well as my daughter. She's always looking out for me. Anyway, the next objective was Koblenz. We rolled into Koblenz and found nothing. It boarded up windows, boarded up cellar windows. So we went around these nice neighborhoods and all, and went on to the Rhine River. Well, the Rhine River was right there, but we found a castle. And later on, we learned that the 345th Regiment coming up encountered heavy fire at these houses, which were boarded up, and they took off the boards, and behind them was the entire German army. And we'd already bypassed them, but they had this big fight. They cussed us out for that. When we got to the Rhine River, I decided to lead a foot patrol down along the river, looking for possible places for boats to get across. When the Germans on the other side had an anti-aircraft gun, and they were shooting that. I don't know how they depressed it, but they were firing anti-aircraft shells at us. So we hid behind these boulders till they quit or what, and or gave up. And went back up, and we spent a day or two in a castle. These beautiful parquet floors with knights of armor around, and civilians had poured in and taken over this whole place. But we mixed in with the civilians. No, we didn't talk to them, they didn't talk to us. And we spent about 2 days while they erected a bridge across the Rhine River. And when we got across, my duty was to go ahead into central Germany. And so we headed down and had no incident till the colonel said, "Well, you're slow again, you better get up and get started." And so at this time we really got up early and took off. We went down to Autobahn, and when it became daylight, they had prisoners marching up the center aisle, and we were flying down there with our rubber tire vehicles. Tanks on the Autobahn would get hot and tow tracks if they went too fast. And then we cut off through the countryside to our objective. And suddenly we came upon a place where the Germans had stacked up box mines. And a box mine is like a flower box. It's about this long and that big. And they were stacked up on the side of the road, and we stopped. There was a trench already dug where they were going to lay those mines in. In the company report, I noticed it said these box mines were dummies. Now I wonder who checked to see if they were dummies. I mean, who's going to drive over one of these things? Say, "Well, there's nothing there." Anyway, I was surprised that anybody would interject anything as silly as that. So, having been in basic training, trained in the 37 millimeter and a tank gun, we knew about laying mines and covering with fire. So I went on my foot patrol. I went ahead and there were some houses there and big boulders, so I decided to look, to find the guns that were or at least a gun covering these mines. And I found none. So I got in the vehicle again, and we went on down the road. When there was a bridge and a creek, and there was a little village here, and the creek went around like this in a big arc. Well, the guns covering those minefields were aimed at me, because this 88 shell went zap right between the ears. And it was so close, the vehicle was so close, that this tracer was white hot. And it didn't turn red till it passed me. I noticed it bounced like an old shoe up in between me and the light tank following me. Now the snow was still on the ground, and the tank just turned on its tracks and took off for cover, while we had to back up. And I was on the 50 caliber anti-aircraft, where you just press with both hands, with thumbs, and I poured the 50 calibers into that smoke where the projectile had come from, while a gunner, my sergeant, was peppering it with this 30 caliber. I kept hitting him on the head. That means fire the 37 millimeter. And he never fired it. So when we got through, I asked him, what happened? Why didn't you fire? And he said, oh, I was trying to fire, but the safety was on. I mean, this is all ridiculous. This whole the training we had. And I don't even know whether this particular vehicle's gun had been fired. What you do is look through the bore of the barrel from behind and sight target, and then fire a projectile at it, looking through the upper thing and adjusting the sight to match the way it goes. I don't know whether he had ever done that or not either. But anyway, I was fired. I went into the colonel to get my orders for the next objective the next morning after I had taken my sleeping bag off of the turret, and that night before had unrolled it on the floor, and these bullets were all in my bedroll, clattering around on the floor from German fire at us with a machine gun, I guess. At any rate, the colonel said, well, I've replaced you. You can just ride in the back of the console. And I said, well, if I can't lead it, I'm just not gonna be in it.
Okay, that's a good transition point. Again, we gotta rush here, Bob. So what happens after he's relieved from being this Tiger Patrol leader? He then begins to want to switch to Army. Okay, and I'm going to go through this quickly. Let him come back. You can ask questions later. He wanted to drive one of the big Sherman tanks up there, but he was assigned to the smaller reconnaissance tank on the right. And he spent the rest of the time as an armor officer until the war was over. That's his personalized tank right here with his Dolly, I think one of his sweethearts' name on it. That's all in the book. You got to buy the book now to get that. But Bob, we need to go on because we're running late. We need to go to this best part of this movie about this good-looking girl that you met. So this is what happened. The war's over. The 87th Division has gone back to Fort Benning to be relieved, and Bob is on tank duty in Germany. And tell us how you met this beautiful girl, Bob.
Well, I was in the 4th Armored Division Cavalry in Regensburg as a replacement, of course. after the war was over. And we always were looking for whiskey and women. So we we couldn't find any, so we ended up in a Matrix hotel where these two girls were waitresses. It was Marlies and her sister. And we said, we would like a couple of scotches. And they said, we don't have any, we talked to them a little bit. And I asked Marley what time she got off. And she said 9 o'clock, and I said, well, I'll pick you up. And so we left, and I came back at 9 o'clock, and she was getting out of that hotel. She was running down the steps. There was the lamplight, she was fine to go to her apartment. And it was this light snow started falling. I mean, it was very romantic, this whole incident. Mm-hmm. And we got about halfway to our apartment, and it was really snowing by then. And we went into the alcove of a church there, and I kissed her, and I said, boy, this starts something. And she and her sister were then transferred from the waitress to the Donette, where they had a library in progress. They were building an American library, and she and her sister learned how to catalog books. And then they got a truck, and they had a mobile library, and would go out to various little towns with their libraries where soldiers were on outpost duty. Anyway, that's the short of that. But I dated her as many times as I could. And then suddenly there was this Russian threat of an invasion or whatever, of sabotage of power plants, dams, or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And so they sent my whole unit of the F company and
whatever the company was.
Whatever company that was. I was sent up to, it was about 40 miles away, up on the border. The name of the town was Cham, C-H-A-M. And this picture up in the upper right is where she's got her foot up. And her best expression was, the bottom of my boots to you, and she showed me the bottom of the boot. Because I was always trying to make love to her, and she just gave me all this baloney about I was overstretched and all that. And there was something wrong with me. I tried to.
So that's the German expression, show you the bottom of the boot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, her expression anyway.
I
never heard it before, but that's what happened there. And the bottom line was that we had to get married or else there was no sex between you and me. And so of course the law was no marriage, certainly. And it had just been passed that you could even date the German girls. There was no fraternization at first, and then finally we went out. Well, it was against the law to marry any foreign German. So we decided to go to. She decided she would marry me, but we had to go out of town. We went to the next village or what and found a Protestant church, and I had my Jeep, but I had my 45 around my waist, and I couldn't leave that in the Jeep. So she went in the church and the preacher came out, but he says, no, it's against the law for me to marry you. And so we sort of said, I do in front of him, and that's what I told my mother. So she and my dad took a trip to Europe, and of course he ended up in that town, checking to see if that was true. If that really happened like that. So then I went back to this town where we found this ski slope, and I said, I want all the skis, boots, and poles, men's and women's, out in the street, because we had found a ski slope, and it was good for the weekends with the nurses and the military government and everybody.
That's when you were kind of a recreational officer.
Yeah, I became a recreational officer. And so everybody really enjoyed that. And we put on the skis and hopped in the jeep and went up the top and came down the trails and stopped. We had to just fall over. Nobody knew how to ski, but they didn't care, you know. It was nice soft snow. It wasn't like North Carolina snow.
Yeah.
And we just had a good time and then partied all night. And we were invited to the military government house for breakfast, where the waiters wore tails. Well, I mean, this was really high cotton.
We're going to go on to one other. Again, I think later on they had an official marriage. Everything was in a big church, and he can tell you some more about that. Let's talk about one other real important thing that you did in this Operation Paperclip. Tell people what that was and how your involvement was in that.
Yeah, I was in later on assigned for replacement, so I went to the replacement place, and guess who was in charge of it? Colonel Muir.
Wow.
He had on his majors. He'd been promoted to major from colonel. Finally found out he'd formerly been a captain, but now he was a major. And I talked to him a few minutes, and he says, "Well, I've got a job for you, but I can't tell you what it is. But you can handle that." And I said, "Well, I'll take it." And this time I just went ahead and took it. And when I got there, it was Operation Paperclip, which was getting German scientists to work on our U.S. rocket program. So if you hear about anything about Russian rockets, or the superseding ours in flight, they were really German, because we were in competition with the Russians to get the best scientists. And we got one of our own von Braun to go to Huntsville, Alabama. But there were a lot of other scientists that were picked up, like the dirigible man, Eckstein or something like that.
What?
Hugo
Eckner.
Heck,
Hugo Eckner. At any rate.
Tell about that time that you were picking up one, and didn't you invite you to a big supper farewell deal before you took him back?
Well, this was on the Moselle. And, my driver and I took off from Landshut to the Moselle to pick up this scientist. And they said, well, we had planned a big party. Why don't you and your driver join us and before he leaves? So they had the whole family there, and we joined them, but they had this wine that had this viscous taste to it, and we sort of over-imbibed, and everybody was just flat out drunk. And so we couldn't drive, so we had to spend the night there before we could take off back to Lancet with the scientists.
Well, I think there's lots more stories to be read and to be told. You can talk some more. We're going to conclude our presentation now. And rather than try to even take questions now, let's just take a short break so Marty can make our concluding presentation. And I'm sure Bob will be willing to give you good additional information next door or after or during our supper tonight or any time. So thank you very much, Lieutenant Captain Welsh. No, that's the core there. Okay, Marty.